Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Oh well, he said it, so now it has to happen. That's right, it's Thursday, October 25th, 2018. How you doing, everybody? Oh, there's that nice picture of a great catch, being an acrobatic catch in last night's World Series game. Terrific, well done. I mean, I don't really care the way things come out, but it's a nice photo, and everyone should be sharing it. Ready to roll with another show today? I don't know. I'm not. Maybe you want to do a show. Give me a call at whatever number. What's our number here? Okay, nobody knows. Time to take off on another one. That's right, Daily Coast Radio is on the air. Kagro X broadcasts the Ice Liberation Parade, now underway in his cul-de-sac. Listening yesterday, I see. Hi, Bill. Floats, balloons, missile launchers. I like to say it that way. Missile launchers and candy for all the kiddies and the presidents. You know how he likes those starbursts. Thanks very much, Bill, for your morning tweet. And another one, following it up immediately, the mighty OCD, getting to be a habit. Duh. Okay, well, now we understand that, isn't it? It's time for some Kagro X in the morning, hot and fresh, on the airwaves of Netroots Radio. That's right, that's where we are. That's where you found us. We're here, you're here. If I'm here and you're here, oh boy. Another movie. I'm more like Donald Trump than I realize, I think. Don't open any packages from Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and check that door for heat. Real liberals do it live, baby, and we're doing it that way this morning. We have no choice. You do. You can listen to us on podcast or live. I prefer, I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter. You know what? I think I prefer podcast because then I can see that you've downloaded the show and I can count you in our numbers. And then I can use the numbers to complain later on in our little mini commercials about how many people are subscribing versus listening. I need to update that, by the way. And I'm extraordinarily lazy. That is to say, by the time, quite honestly, by the time the show ends, I'm winded and I want to go to sleep. But there's more work to do, and I got to get the show podcast up for those of you who listen that way, and get links over to Scott. And Scott's got to start his work. People have to work when this show is over, including me. And I say every day, I really have to change the commercials. The numbers are better, and that's because you people are fantastic. And you help make it possible for me to justify continuing the show. Well, to everyone, including those people at home who say, what are you doing in around here? Even though their laundry is done and the dishes are miraculously clean every day. I'll tell you, that uncompensated labor. Am I right? People who usually complain about this, which is to say very often the women, because they get stuck with this work. And I always sympathize with it, but I never retweet those complaints on Twitter because I'm like one guy who does the dishes. Big deal. I really need to mansplain or even can you agree with people? I think so, and I think that's what would be happening if I say, oh yeah, well, I agree with you, because I do all that labor at home and I'm uncompensated, but like I'm patting myself on the back for saying, all right, well, I've already done that here. Point is, you should clean your own dishes, I think. Do your own laundry. The point was that there are more of you donating not each day, but there are more of you. That's the big point. And I know in the ad that we cut, at the time, the number was only about 1 in 25 daily downloaders were contributing, well, at least on the trackable monthly recurring donation database, which is now moved over to Patreon. And I guess, let's see, we're probably, let's see, do the math here. I forget how to do math. Anyway, the point is, the numbers have changed, and it's no longer 1 in 25. It's less, and considerably less, I think. It's probably closer to, it might even be under 1 in 20, which is a great step forward. And thank you so much for everybody who makes it, who does it, and makes it possible for me to continue to do this. And I should change it so that you are encouraged by that news. But that not only means recording a new one and editing it, and then, remembering all of that stuff, but doing the math. So I think you can perhaps sympathize with me. But I should get you some updated numbers about that, and really should just cut a new ad spot just for some interest. It would be nice to hear a different thing. I don't know how many of you have to sit through it on the podcast and resent it each day. And I know a couple people have asked, isn't there some way for us to become premium sponsors and get a version of the podcast without those little ads? And there is, and it would be me working, doing twice as much editing work in order to provide that to you. And though some people have said, I would happily compensate you for that time, I have said, squirrel, and then not gone back to that. I guess we probably could arrange it. But I'm looking to minimize the amount of the day that I spend on the show. The 2 hours of the show is probably the smallest and easiest part of doing the work of getting the thing on the air and edited, etc. All right. That's not really necessary to spend that much time on. Donald Trump is a liar, and we might as well get to all of that. Greg Dworkin, I'm sure, has a long list of the various lies that he has told. I am up to 11 messages from Greg, so we'll sift through some of those. Daniel Dale did his usual yeoman's job of sitting through the 594th rally of this week, which is incredible and record-breaking. No president, and it's true, no president has done so much political campaign work on the clock as president when he's not running as this guy. But this is what he loves the best. And a feature that I gather from the context that Daniel Dale has done several times, but I have missed every time up until now, the Rally Lie Bingo card. The Rally Lie Bingo card. Let me open it up here in a way that allows me to preserve this for the record. The Rally Lie Bingo card filled in. See, he's got somebody else who helps out with that. I don't know whether that's a regular feature, but Kezel Bob is the Twitter handle of the person who did this. Kerry King Neal, as Kezel Bob, has sent along the Rally Falsehood Bingo. Did he say falsehood? As opposed to Rally Lie? Yeah, Trump Rally Falsehood Bingo. And Daniel Dale refers to it as the lie bingo card. So good for you. He's one of the only journalists doing it. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares. One's the free space. So 9 of the, what's 8 by 8? Is or 1, 2, bingo. 5 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 25 squares minus 1. So 8 of the 24. Is that a third of the bingo card is filled in, but he did not get bingo. So he's got to rearrange those squares a little bit. But lots of great lies, and including Daniel Dale's patented trademark Sir count, which I love. He thinks, and he's right, of course, that Trump has a tell for his lies, his story lies. And that's how many times he claims to have been called Sir by the idiotic protagonist in the story. He's usually the idiotic protagonist in the story, I guess. The other characters in the story, the more times they call him Sir, the bigger the lie is. And I think that's about right. Let's see. Greg is here, so he probably heard a little bit about this as well, Sir. So
I did. I think that somebody else does the bingo card, and Daniel Dale cites it.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. But
that's what it looks like.
It's a pretty interesting thing.
It's a funny feature. And yeah.
I like it. Let's talk a little bit about the reporting from that rally.
Okay.
The context, which is often missing from the reporting, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about, is, of course, that we have this mad bomber around, a domestic terrorist. We started talking about it on the show yesterday, and as the day wore on, it turned out there were a bunch more bombs. We're up to 9 now. This morning, bombs were sent to Robert De Niro and to Joe Biden.
Record-breaking. More bombs being sent to more liberals. Okay.
Right. Were the bombs today copycats? Probably not. They didn't have time. It's probably just slow U.S. postal delivery service. But nonetheless, some of these have been hand-delivered. Some of these have been sent by courier, like the one to CNN. And the FBI's on the case, and I presume that they're going to eventually, catch whoever's doing this, whether it's one person or a group of nutcases. However, as president, one expects in these perilous times to do the presidential thing and try to bring the country together and so on and so forth. And so what happened is that Trump was relatively subdued at yesterday's rally. He allowed the lock her up chance to happen.
Yes.
Even though Hillary Clinton was the recipient.
You got to do Freebird.
Of one of those mail bombs,
right.
You know. So that was bad.
Lock her up in protective custody. That's not a bad thing.
But he basically read from a teleprompter rather than attacking Maxine Waters and his other usual targets. You know who his usual targets are because those are the ones who got bombs sent to them.
Right, yes. They will put surveyor's marks on them for you. Help you figure it out.
So Kelly O'Donnell, one of the NBC reporters, and this is going to be a discussion about how one puts things into context. And for that, you only have to remember that this bombing thing is going on and that Trump has a pattern of being Trump for like years.
Yes, that he has been Trump for a long time.
For 35 or 40 seconds, say something. Mm-hmm. You can't take it out of context and say, look, he's different.
Oh, did he pivot?
It's one of those pivots he became presidential thing.
Shoot.
Because he read from the teleprompter.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what Kelly O'Donnell said, different Trump tonight. Real Donald Trump did not use his usual political knocks on Clinton, Warren, Waters, and did not use his fake news attack on media. He waited till this morning when he tweeted that.
Oh, but he did use a fake news attack on media last night. It was just a different one.
Yeah, and so I
It's
asked
your fault.
Kelly O'Donnell, why are you always played? And, of course, she took great offense at that.
Oh,
That's
well.
ridiculous. I'm reporting accurately what I saw. And
You're
her
not.
colleagues at First Read, which is NBC, said, those are all great words of advice in our highly charged partisan times. The one problem, the president doesn't practice it, far from it. In other words, they added context to the observation that he was preaching civility or being a little bit different than he normally is. And without that context, it comes across as a here he is, now he's finally become president thing.
Yes, right.
And why do reporters do that? So we were talking online a little bit, me and some buddies on Twitter.
Oh.
And I reminded them, are you familiar with Myers-Briggs? You remember Myers-Briggs?
Yeah. It's
the
no good.
X versus N conversation.
Yes.
Where the S part of it is if your worldview is that you make these observations and look at them and then come to a conclusion based on what you're seeing, Kelly O'Donnell's a very S-style reporter. I see it. I report it. This is what he said. I'm doing it accurately. So long as I'm doing it accurately, you shouldn't criticize me for doing it wrong because this is exactly what he said and I got it right. Or in the Iraq era, what we used to call the stenographers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whereas the First Read interpretation is a little bit more it's a little bit more intuitive. It's adding things that weren't said and saying things that were said and putting it together and coming to the conclusion that he's not practicing what he's preaching, and you can't get that from just writing down what he says.
No. A good test of this. Well,
you can't do that. You have to add the whole rest of it. You could say, well, in this particular rally, he looks subdued. However, he's done that before, and then, the next day reverted back to type. Yeah. You got to add that part. You can't just say, oh, look, he said something nice. That changes everything.
Yeah, and I guess it only happens with things maybe it only happens with things like that, where he says, we have to be nice to each other, and so they were hoping for that, so they reported it, so they wouldn't be called unfair for not giving him plaudits for saying we have to be nice to each other. But the defense of it is weird. Then,
First Read is, was Trump last week using
right.
Representative Greg Gianforte, never wrestle him, any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind of guy. And here's what Trump tweeted about John Brennan, former CIA director, another pipe bomb target. He will go down as easily the worst in history, and since getting out, he's become nothing less than a loudmouth partisan political hack who can't be trusted with the secrets to our country. And then he calls for civility. And then he points his finger at the media and says the media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories.
Look what you made
and
me
then,
do.
Of course, he never looked in the mirror, says NBC News.
Right.
I mean, that's the context. You can't just look at it and say, oh, look how calm he was. He read from a teleprompter. It didn't say anything mean, mostly.
Right. You can't, and she knows that, and I don't know if she's gone through the, the thought exercise on it or not. But I mean, if the president gets up and says, "I am above the law, I could throw you all in prison at the snap of my fingers,"
but let's be civil about it.
Well, forget it. Suppose he says, "I'm going to be a total bastard about it." But he says, "I'm above the law. There is no prohibition on torture. I could have all of you arrested. I could torture your families right now if I wanted to. It's in the Constitution." And Kelly O'Donnell just says, "Well, there it is," and says it, as opposed to saying, "But that's bizarre for him to say, because A, it's not true, B, it's dictatorial and completely out of character for what we expect from presidents of the United States." She wouldn't say
when
that.
They do that, they don't do either one of those things. You know what they do? They add but obviously it seems like he was joking.
Yeah, they do sometimes do that.
Because whenever he does something really stupid, or even better, when they should be stenographers and just write the word salad down, because on paper, when you read it, it doesn't make any sense, they go ahead and explain what he meant.
Yeah. Or like, there's going to be a tax cut before November. There will be a tax cut probably after November, said the president. All right. How did you get to that? He said before November. You reported, but he really meant afterwards he would approach Congress for it.
Right? So, if you're going to interpret what he meant, then don't turn around and say, "But how can you criticize me for simply just writing what he said?" Because you only interpret it when you want to prop him up, and you don't interpret it when it's like bad.
Yeah. All right.
That we had that nice little discussion this morning.
Kelly,
some cute stuff obviously going by about this. The cable news always likes to play it up as these bombs are happening and everybody's frightened and scared.
I am. Yikes.
That typically happens when the reporters themselves are affected. CNN obviously was. The building was evacuated, and they were reporting from out in the street. They did a very professional job. But I'm a native New Yorker. I promise you most of New York is not especially scared. Uh-huh. They're raising their eyebrows and saying, "Huh, weird," and then going to work.
Is that near my Starbucks?
Yeah, exactly. It was, of course, Andrew Cuomo kind of thing, that when he gave a press conference describing what was going on, he had to throw in, and a suspicious package was also sent to my office. And that raised everybody's eyebrow, because why would anybody bother with Andrew Cuomo? And, of course, being a New Yorker, we were already doing the dark humor thing, saying, obviously this is a New Yorker, because nobody outside of New York has heard of Andrew Cuomo. And only Andrew Cuomo thinks he's a national figure. But the New York Police Department official added, the suspicious package at Cuomo's office was, in fact, an informational package containing literature.
That is suspicious.
Right. As Senior Cold River pointed out on Twitter, it could have been a literary device.
Okay.
But nobody thinks Cuomo was clever enough to really get that joke. So one of the reasons Andrew Cuomo will never be president is you saw him yesterday trying to insert himself in the middle of stuff that he didn't belong.
I thought because no one would vote for him.
That's another reason. But one of the reasons is you see that. Let me contrast that with an incredible politician, a really skilled politician, maybe one of the most skilled that we have right now, who will get more credit after he wins, and that's Andrew Gillum.
Okay.
Right? He had a debate again with Ron DeSantis yesterday.
They're debating a lot.
It's probably the last one. He has a lead. Even the New York Times live poll that they're running happens to show him in the lead. And both Nelson and Gillum are actually looking pretty well if you're looking at the poll in real time that they do. Nelson has a 50-42 lead over Rick Scott, the Republican, and the governor, 48-41, Gillum over DeSantis, 10% undecided there. So he's looking pretty good. There was a story about the FBI investigating the fact that he accepted Hamilton tickets at one point that he got from his brother, and it was unclear what the provenance of those tickets were. That came up in the debate, and Gillum basically said, we got 99 problems here, and Hamilton ain't one of them. And that was the last of it. And so if it was supposed to be a political attack, that didn't work. Yeah. What did work is after Ron DeSantis had said something. And remember, this is a guy who's been linked with saying things like monkeying around, and he's been associated with white supremacists and so on and so forth. Gillum turned to him and said, I'm not saying you're a racist, but the racists think you're a racist.
Yeah, that was
And
a
it
pretty
was
good
a
one.
great line, well delivered. And part of the great delivery is that this is split screen stuff. People are watching, and DeSantis' jaw just dropped, and he just looked totally uncomfortable and out of place.
He's a weird-looking guy, DeSantis is, and
Right.
his
But
reactions are weird.
That there is a natural politician,
That's pretty good.
as opposed to, let's say, Andrew Cuomo, who not so much.
Right. Well, good luck to him. I hope he can pull this one off. It certainly looks like it. I mean, DeSantis is a disaster, but
Yeah.
you know,
I
if
mean,
they cheat,
it's
what can
kind
you
of
do?
like a Doug Jones thing in Alabama. I don't know if a Gillum win says as much about Gillum as it does about DeSantis being a bad candidate. But as we talked about yesterday with that Bill Scher article, some of the 15 races that'll determine how the Democrats run in 2020 will be things like Andrew Gillum. Remember, everybody said, hey, you can't run Andrew Gillum. He's too left. He's for, impeaching Trump, and he's like a pro-single payer and stuff like that. That'll never fly in a place like Florida, which is a purple state. And actually, he looks like he's going to win. Now, does that mean that his programs are popular all over the country, including in red areas? No, it does not. It means he's running against Ron DeSantis.
That is true. And DeSantis
But will that be overinterpreted if he wins? Absolutely.
Yes.
Along with the other 14 races
Sure.
that Bill Scher pointed out. So sometimes, all politics is national, and sometimes it's all local. And in this particular case, it's both.
Yeah. What do you need?
Right. So that's that. Other interesting polling that came out of the latest batch of live polls. Then Pete Roskam in Illinois 6 is trailing by 2 points to the Democrat. Tom MacArthur, who engineered the Affordable Care Act repeal, is ahead in his district by only 2 points over Andy Kim with 9% undecided. These are all close races. And remember, what makes it a wave is when you win more than your share of the close ones.
Yes.
Right? And there's a lot of close races here. So it's of interest. And Nate Silver was writing about some of this stuff. This morning he tweeted, remember everything you've heard about Democrat suburban surge? It's wrong.
Everything? Oh.
Well, okay, not wrong, but it's partly right. But polling tells a more complicated story. The Democrats are performing just as well in rural Obama to Trump districts. A lot of those are in the Midwest, by the way. They're doing just as well there as the urban Clinton Romney ones. In other words, if you voted for Romney and then Clinton, the impression is that maybe you're moving more blue.
Yeah.
And if you're moving more blue, that's something that the Democrats can take advantage of when they try to take the House back. And if you're looking at Obama to Trump districts, those are areas that were trending more red. And they're rural. And so maybe those are not the districts that the Democrats just spent a lot of time trying to get back. You have to outvote them by winning elsewhere. That was the current theory. It turns out that's not necessarily correct.
Aha.
If you look at how Democrats are doing in those districts that went from Romney to Clinton, the Democrats on average, if you're comparing 2016 to 2012, the Democrats are doing about 1.5 points better.
Okay.
Those are districts like California 49, California 48, Virginia 10 with Barbara Comstock. I think that's yours,
Yes.
right? They're doing about
Yeah,
1.5 points better than they were in 2016.
Okay.
But when you look at the Obama to Trump districts, and there's Minnesota, Iowa, places like that, upstate New York, Long Island, the Democrats are doing 5.5 points better
Wow.
than 2016. These were all red wins, but the Democrats are leading in a lot of them. And why? Because these are places the Democrats won in 2012.
Yes.
And
Okay. So
lost in
we're
2016.
not out.
And now they're doing better, and maybe they're just reverting to a 2012 kind of, that's where really things should have been, and 2016 was an aberration.
Certainly an aberration. I don't know if that was the case for them or not. I don't know what would move people to try. Hey, let's try out crazy. But
Well,
I guess
because
it happens. Or doesn't.
Comey and the Russians and not liking Hillary Clinton for various and sundry reasons, and that really may have been a black swan kind of different election that doesn't really tell us about the patterns about how people are voting and where their heads are at. The other side of the coin is that you had a lot of people in 2016 who don't normally vote come out and vote. And if that's your Republican coalition, sometimes the last one in is the first one out. And they're not finding enough in this particular election to make them come out and vote again. So, I mean, there's a number of, and what does that leave you with? It leaves you with 2012 rather than 2016, which was okay for Democrats in those areas.
They were all voting to hasten the revolution.
And that really has a lot more to do, I think, with the House than the Senate. The House still looks like, 38 to 40 Democratic pickups.
All right.
No guarantee.
They like pickups in those districts.
And the Senate continues to be difficult, and governors actually look pretty good. We may own half the governors by the time this is all done.
That would be helpful. There was a time there right after the 2016 elections when people took notice all of a sudden, oh my God, almost 3/4 of the states are entirely Republican controlled. That's bad.
And they're doing weird things, and they're passing bathroom bills, and they're doing voter suppression, and who's out there to stop them? Because the courts aren't doing it. Because Justice Roberts doesn't necessarily believe in the Voting Rights Act. So what are we going to do? But the answer is, well, if you're the governor and you're a blue governor, you might not be so into voter suppression. And that would be a good thing for your constituents, and it would be a good thing for democracy, and it'd be a good thing for America.
I hope you'll help us out there, states.
Right. So that's where all that stuff stands.
Okay. Well, we got a couple of seconds before I even start the music that tells us we have 30 seconds. So let's do a whole other story.
Okay. In key House districts sought by Democrats, fear of defeat becomes fuel.
All right. Now stop this story.
And that's what we'll cover after.
I like the way things flow when we have this nice music. Okay. Well, let's see. Now what am I going to do for 20 seconds, Greg?
I don't know what I'm going to do for 15 minutes after.
All right. Well, we'll be right back after we take a short break and regroup and then work our way down the list of stories. You know how this show goes. This is very simple. It's an easy concept. You relax for 2 minutes. We'll scramble around and be right back after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And I don't want to interrupt or anything, but it's time for Greg Dworkin to come back on. So I want to jump out of the way. Look at this.
Well, it was
I caught you unawares in the middle of coffee. Okay.
Right. That was just a very funny tweet from Ride the Curve, who said, David, can you please stop interrupting? As if David's the one that interrupts.
What? Where am I?
Quiet, David, I'm talking.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. It was very funny. I just have to point out, it's just a literary device.
Yes, just like the suspicious package. It's suspicious to send literature, though, to Andrew
To a
Cuomo.
guy who's not likely to read it. I know.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, by the way, I saw all of these, the packages, the ones that they pulled aside that they decided were, in fact, well, the literature is suspicious too, but the bombs. And I saw a picture of the packaging, and I guess whoever did it, thought that they could get away with it if they just put Debbie Wasserman Schultz's return address on it. It's like they were going to go and arrest her. Yeah, we spelled a lot of things wrong, including the fact that it came from Florida's. The last A of Florida is a typo S.
I think they left one of the N's out of Brennan when they sent it to John Brennan at CNN, where he doesn't work.
No. They should have sent it to CNN. Maybe it was to CN. It was supposed to go to Canada.
That could be. So another thing that was in the bomb is a fake ISIS flag. Did you see that?
Oh, yes, right. I did see that one. It's apparently a right-wing meme that they pass around
Not that there's anything to suggest this is right-wing stuff.
No, of course not. No. I'm being nice, presidential, etc. Yeah, they took the ISIS flag and mocked it up, I guess making fun of the fact that Arabic lettering looks like squiggly lines to those of us who can't read it. And what does it say? It's like "Get Her Done," the Larry the Cable Guy thing in there, which I don't know. I guess that's supposed to be funny, perhaps in Obama to Trump districts. I don't know.
Something like that. So, all of this is happening in the background. And, of course, we have an election in a week and a half. So this story that we teased right before the break, in key House districts sought by Democrats, fear of defeat becomes fuel. That's true. Democrats in recent days have begun to feel a last-minute bout of nausea wash over them because we're Democrats.
Right.
Terrified of reliving the dejection they awoke to on the morning of November 9th, they're attempting to harness these nervous emotions and inject a bit of fear into the hearts of their supporters. Katie Hill, who's emerged as one of the party's most promising first-time congressional candidates, looked out at a group of 100 supporters and revealed the new polling indicated a 4-point swing against her in what for decades has been a conservative stronghold driven by consolidation by Republican voters into the camp of her opponent. We were ahead. The last poll we got back has us exactly tied. These are the ones that should be, I don't want to say the easiest, but really the ones that should flip from red to blue in this kind of climate. Hill said later about districts such as hers, won in 2016 by Hillary Clinton. If we can't do it here, then how on earth are we going to do it in the ones that are more red? Democrats are favored in 11 of the 25 Republican-held districts that Clinton won, while Republicans are favored in 3. But 12 are still toss-ups, and they're seeing a burst of energy and spending from both sides. We'll talk about Nevada in a bit where you can see that. In a way that has Republicans feeling bullish and Democrats worried. The problem for Democrats are candidates are awash in attention. The money's pouring in. Volunteers are eager to help. But in many of these seats, voters who live in the districts are proving more difficult to win over than Democrats once hoped. Do I hope? I hope. But because Trump's getting elected, for the rest of my life, I'll never trust what's going to happen again. That's not necessarily bad. That's why I always laugh when people say, oh, you're being complacent. Are you kidding? No, it's impossible to be complacent. You can be confident. You can be, wrong. But there's no way you're going to be complacent about what's going on right now.
I'm okay with that.
Right? We're worried about not turning out Hispanic voters like in Texas. But the bulk of the battles are being fought in historically conservative suburbs that are filled with highly educated voters who disapprove of Trump and see the midterm as a way to express that displeasure. And some of those districts have already been abandoned by Republicans, like Kevin Yoder in Kansas and Mike Hoffman in Colorado. But, in Orange County and places around Los Angeles where there's contested races, it's close.
Yes.
They still have an advantage, the Democrats do. And the Democrats are freaking out because the election's 2 weeks from now, Wasserman said, recalling a similar Republican freakout in October 2010, just before the party gained 63 seats. He said he expects Democratic gains of between 25 and 35 seats, just above the margin for control, and Republicans privately concede they're going to lose at least 18, but no more than 40.
Oh, all right.
Right? So the chance of being 60 instead of 40 is much less.
Yes, but now it's going to be more than 40.
Right. So we'll see. We don't really know. And, part of the problem is that the people that tend to vote Democrat that would make it a really important wave are the people that don't typically show up to vote, new voters. And a lot of them are young, and they tend not to vote right away. It's the olds that vote right away. We have information, for example, out of North Carolina looking at the early vote there, which is trending Democratic, but Mike Bitzer, who tracks this for Old North State politics, says that about 20 to 22% of those who are voting early this year voted on Election Day in 2016. What does that mean? It means that's what we call cannibalization. These are people that were going to vote anyway.
Yeah.
They're not new voters.
Okay.
They're just voting early. Then that means they won't vote on Election Day. It's the same number of votes. What you need is to pick up new voters. And there are those, but it's a smaller number.
Yes.
Right? That's like 10, 11%. Now, that's enough to make a difference, mind you. But, that's one of the reasons why you just can't look at early numbers and know exactly what's going on. So since we've been following it so closely, let's give you the Nevada report.
All right.
And Here, very strong numbers out of Clark County, which is heavily Democratic, and that's good, but there's a caveat. So on Saturday, October 20th, 30,436 votes. Sunday, 23,741. Monday, 29,000. Tuesday, 25,500. Yesterday, 24,300. To go over 20,000 in a midterm is generally good for Democrats.
Oh.
The other good Democratic result is in Washoe County. That's Reno. The Clark County is Las Vegas. And again, that's where most of the people live between those two. But Washoe's usually a swing state. And right now, after 4 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, after 5 days in Washoe, the Democrats have 15,800 votes and the Republicans have 13,500 votes based on in-person early voting. So it's usually a 2% Republican county actually has more Democratic votes at this time, except the Republicans have done a very, very strong absent mailing ballot.
Absentee, yeah.
And they've picked up an extra 3,500 votes, cutting into what is otherwise an 8,000 vote lead, and they've made it only 4,500 lead. The Democrats need to get that up to about 10 to 15,000 by the time early voting is done, normally, in order to have that firewall so that on the election day, when Republicans tend to vote in more numbers than Democrats, you need that firewall in order to win. The Republicans think they're doing a good enough job so that that firewall isn't high enough right now.
All right.
Right. Republicans
More
think that
higher.
they've gotten their numbers out and that their numbers are better than the Democratic numbers. And the Democrats don't necessarily agree, but what you need to see, this is week 1 of 2, by the end of the week, by Friday or Saturday, you need to see that Democratic lead increasing, and you need to see whether or not the rural votes start to decrease. In other words, is that the same cannibalization we see in North Carolina, where the people who are going to vote anyway are just voting early? That doesn't necessarily help Republicans.
Okay.
But if they're voters who otherwise wouldn't have come out but are coming out for a midterm because they've been energized, that does help Republicans. So the Republicans, of course, are Republicans. They always feel confident about everything, even when they're losing.
True.
And the Democrats are Democrats, and they're, keeping a close, worried eye on these numbers, and that's where Nevada stands right now. John Ralston, the guru, says it's too close to call. Now, I also have to add 18, 16, 17, 18% of the votes are neither Democratic nor Republican. They're other. Okay, these are the independents, the non-declared votes. Different states call them different things. The Nevada Secretary of State calls them other in Nevada. In Florida, I think they're NPAs. They're no prior affiliate, or NDAs, no declared affiliate in some states. Frankly, I forget which state calls them which. But they're about 18, 19% of the total votes. And which way are they going to go? And I asked Ralston which way they normally go, and he said it depends on the election. Some years they go one way, some years they go another way.
Well,
and by listing their affiliation, you don't know how they voted. There's a lot of votes that are coming out in Clark that are Republican votes, 38%, 43% are Democratic, and 38% are Republican overall in the state. But in Clark, there's 60,000 Democratic votes and 47,000 Republican votes and 25,000 others. Are those Republicans, including suburban women Republicans, who are voting Democratic? We don't know that. We can't tell that just from the designation of what party they are. Democrats would feel better, and they're more likely to count on Democratic turnout for Democratic votes. You can't depend on Republicans voting Democratic. That's certainly not happening in the exurbs and in the rural areas. And you don't know how the others are going to vote. And so Ralston looks at the numbers and say, right now it's too close to call.
So that's no help.
So it's no help, but it kind of matches the polling for a change, which said that Dean Heller has like a 1 or 2 point lead. Could be, based on these numbers. Rosen could win. Could be based on these numbers. So more to come. But
Okay.
Florida numbers, similar in the sense that they're following a typical Florida pattern with older GOP voters voting first. We don't know when and where younger voters will show up. Democratic numbers have been strong. Republican numbers have been strong. It's a typical Florida turnout, meaning probably close race. And so what we're not seeing is overwhelming Democratic turnout, but no Republican turnout. That's not what's going to happen. It's going to be a high turnout election. And that's one of the reasons why the Democrats aren't complacent.
Okay. I wasn't.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that's
but
one
if
of the
you were,
reasons,
don't.
I guess. Right. And if you were thinking about it, here's a reason not to, I
Right.
guess. Okay. Well, here we go. We'll wait. Wait
Okay.
and see.
Wait and see.
Everything
All
is
right.
wait and
Anyway,
see.
that's my
Yeah.
report for today.
Well, we'll wait
so
and see whether
you
that's your
figure out.
report.
We'll just have to wait and see what you do for the rest of the show. I don't know.
Wait and see.
What are you
There's
going to
no way
do
of
when
telling.
I'm not around for you to interrupt
John Ralston will tell you. He
on your
doesn't
show?
know. Yeah, we'll have to wait and find out. Just
He's not
because
up
I'm
yet.
here
He's up
doesn't
late
mean
tallying these numbers,
Yeah,
and
right.
in the morning I can never get him to respond.
he's here. He could be doing the show. He might fall asleep and not do the show. We don't know.
Yeah,
Wait and see.
these things can happen. It's very hard to know. So, I think it's important to BNS and track exactly what you see, but it's also important to be an N and try to interpret what you see. And that's my advice for you children today. Go out and be an S and an N, and try to pull it all together. And maybe we'll come up with some other letter that will mean that you're like everything.
We need to unify the country.
Yeah, exactly right. So,
Yes.
what do you think?
Huh? I don't know. We'll see.
I don't know.
Well, we got a lot to
nice
catch
talking
up on,
to
of
you.
course. Well, let's see. Saudi Arabia has changed its mind about
really?
whether or not they meant to kill Khashoggi. We have that.
It was deliberate.
Yes, and premeditated as well. They just realized that it was premeditated, which is a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But that's what they're saying now, and I can tell you all about it if I'm willing to try and pronounce the name of the writer working for the Washington Post on this one.
Yeah. Oh, I just remembered it's premeditated.
Yeah.
On our
I know. I was busy meditating on some other things, and I forgot to tell you that we had it planned.
This is what we call a pre-existing meditation, and
Yes.
it's not always covered.
I had it on Kavanaugh's calendar, and I
Yeah.
forgot.
forgot all
Murder
about
journalist.
All right. Well, I'll leave you to that and figuring
All right,
out
let's
exactly
see.
what that
Okay.
means. This is Greg
Yeah.
Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waltman, Kagro in the morning. Thank you so much for interrupting me all day. And I'll be back on
interrupted you
Monday
there.
where you
Okay.
can interrupt me again.
Very good. Thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate it. And I interrupted your hanging up even. So fantastic. All right. Continue on here. I think this makes some sense to share with you. Saudi Arabia, in latest reversal, says Khashoggi's killing was premeditated. I cannot really figure out why they are doing this exactly, but I guess we're supposed to think that they're being honest now. At least they're honest about their premeditated murders. I mean, I guess this is, I don't know. How do you say whether this is a good thing or not? All right. It is written, as I said, for the Washington Post by Tamer El-Gobashi. I'm hoping I got the emphasis in the right place. It's not that difficult to read, but El-Gobashi and El-Gobashi, or El-Gobashi, I don't know, but I appreciate the clarification here. Saudi Arabia's public prosecutor said on Thursday that Jamal Khashoggi was killed in a planned operation, citing information it received from Turkish investigators in Istanbul, according to a statement from the kingdom's foreign ministry. It is the latest reversal from Saudi authorities, who are, of course, Sauds, but okay, who last week said Khashoggi was killed accidentally, remember this, in a fist fight at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul by rogue agents. President Trump had initially said that explanation was credible, but in recent days expressed doubts, calling it the worst cover-up ever. By the way, part of the worst cover-up ever, unless it's an extraordinarily savvy play by the Sauds here, the reference to the killing being accidental and having been committed by rogue agents in particular, not overzealous agents or whatever, but rogue agents, is very revealing. It's not solid proof, and it could just be coincidence, or it could be the fact that the word rogue was planted in their mind by Trump having used the same term, or they could all have been talking about it on the phone, which China would know about now. That we'll have to cover later on. And it was agreed upon that rogue agents or rogue killers was the theory of the moment that they were going to go with. And the fact that the Sauds now fall back on the same word reveals too much. Why not speculate that way? Why not? It would be irresponsible at this point not to speculate that Donald Trump was in on the murder, the premeditation, and the cover-up. We might as well just go ahead and say that, because what's the difference? You heard yesterday's show. No one cares. I'll just say it. President Trump, as we know, called it the worst cover-up ever, which is an extraordinary thing for him to say as well, given the ridiculous thing on top of his head and the fact that he paints his face orange on purpose. Two of the worst cover-ups I've ever seen. And that's not even calling out the white tennis shorts, which are also among the worst cover-ups I've ever seen. According to the statement, a joint Saudi-Turkish investigative team in Istanbul indicates that the suspects in the incident had committed their act with a premeditated intention. They brought a bone saw. Come on. Let's be real here. The announcement underscored the rapidly mounting pressures on Saudi Arabia to fully illuminate Khashoggi's killing after its previous explanations were contradicted by Turkey and met with skepticism by the United States, a close Saud family Saudi ally. Still, neither Trump nor Saudi Arabia has been willing to implicate the Saudi leadership. It's full of Sauds, that's the problem, in the journalist's killing. American intelligence officials and lawmakers have said that an operation targeting a critic of the royal court in a foreign country is unlikely to have been ordered without the knowledge of senior Saudi officials / Saud officials. I wish there really was a journalistic convention for this. Anyway, Thursday's announcement comes days after CIA Director Gina Haspel traveled to Turkey and listened to audio purportedly capturing the journalist's murder, giving a key member of Trump's cabinet access to the central piece of evidence Turkey has used to assert that the killing was planned. Didn't they already play that for Pompeo? And isn't he really also on the cabinet? And he was the former CIA director. They keep playing this for the CIA directors, by the way. Very weird. But, I mean, have we forgotten that? That's probably just an error. But interesting one, nonetheless. And that it's now they're concluding. It's interesting that this comes after playing this for her, like as though part of the audio is, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're killing me. This seems so spontaneous." And they said, "True, but it's actually premeditated." And now we've got him dead to rights. It also came 2 days after the Turkish president. This isn't even Sky News. You know the Turkish president, Erdogan. Is it more like Y or more like W? It's hard to tell sometimes. Gave a speech calling Khashoggi's killing brutal and planned while demanding that the perpetrators be extradited to Turkey. Oh yes, they left Turkey. That's right. The foreign ministry they were spirited out very shortly thereafter. The foreign ministry did not say what led the Saudi prosecutor to draw that conclusion, only that it was based on information shared by Turkish investigators. I think it was my reenactment that did it. Investigators working with Saudi officials in Turkey. According to the statement, the Saudi prosecutor will continue its investigation based on the new information shortly after Khashoggi disappeared on October 2nd, while retrieving a document at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Turkish authorities said he was the victim of a premeditated killing by 15 Saudi agents sent to Turkey on a mission to permanently silence the journalist, killing will do that, who had been critical of the Saudi crown prince, Mr. Bonesaw, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud. I don't know why they don't throw that in there. I mean, the name's long enough as it is, but you should remind everybody about this. Saudi Arabia initially denied any knowledge of Khashoggi's fate, but last week said it had arrested 18 people and dismissed 5 senior officials after a preliminary investigation revealed he was killed in a fist fight, which he wasn't, at the consulate during a botched intelligence operation, which it wasn't. The arrests were accompanied by an announcement that King Salman was replacing his... Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was wishful thinking. Was placing his son, Mohammed, in charge of restructuring the Saudi intelligence apparatus, a move that all but ended speculation that the crown prince would be sanctioned. Mohammed has denied any prior knowledge of the mission and on Wednesday called the journalist's killing a heinous crime, which it was, to be sure. Turkey dismissed the Saudi assertion of an accidental death and has pressed the kingdom to concede that Khashoggi was deliberately targeted for death. Turkish officials have discounted the ability of Saudi Arabia to conduct a credible investigation, given suspicion that the royal court was behind the operation, because they're behind everything. They own the place. That's the way Saudi Arabia works. Officials note that two of Mohammed's closest advisors were dismissed last week when the kingdom said Khashoggi died in a fist fight. We have maintained since the beginning that the Khashoggi murder was premeditated, a senior Turkish official told the Washington Post shortly after the Saudi announcement on Thursday. We owe it to Jamal and his loved ones to uncover all of the truth. The criminal investigation continues in Turkey. I have a feeling here that we're not going to glean much more in the way of new information. I feel like I'm reading the same thing over and over again, and that frequently happens with pieces like this. Is there anything else here? Oh, well, here's some new information, I guess. Through a steady stream, a steady stream of leaks to Turkish and foreign media, Turkish officials have mounted a compelling case that shows the Saudi agents plan to kill Khashoggi, dismember him, and dispose of his remains. The Turks have identified a Saudi forensic specialist, we heard about this guy, an expert in mobile autopsies, which I didn't even know were a thing, and who had traveled to Istanbul the day Khashoggi was planning to visit the consulate. Now, this part is the truly new stuff, I think. They also photographed Saudi diplomatic vehicles scouting wooded areas in the days before Khashoggi disappeared. All for naught, I guess, because they ended up burying, well, at least pieces of him, in the consul general's garden, as I understand it. We heard that one yesterday, the day before. I can't recall exactly which. So all the scouting of wooded areas, unless it was only for part of him, seems to have been a waste of time. In addition, the leaks have featured surveillance pictures of a Saudi agent wearing Khashoggi's clothes and a fake beard. Remember the body double story? Walking around basically trying to fool investigators into thinking that Khashoggi had actually left the consulate. The United States has already taken some steps towards punishing the suspects detained or fired by Saudi Arabia, revoking their visas. So we've gone along with the Fall Guy story on that one. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he's working with Treasury Department on whether to impose sanctions. Those are the kinds of sanctions that work with those guys. On those found responsible for the journalist's death, it was not immediately clear how Thursday's announcement from Riyadh would impact Washington's thinking amid bipartisan demands from Congress for severe punishment for Saudi Arabia, the nation at the center of Trump's Middle East policy. Indeed, there really is no other. Unless, I guess, you count slobbering over Israel and screaming about Iran. All right. Well, that's an interesting addition to things anyhow, and well worth sharing. Let's see what else I have put aside in pocket for you and other notes via Twitter. Let's see. Maybe we should hop over to the... Oh, you know what? I can ask this favor, perhaps, of Greg. I bookmarked a Wall Street Journal interview with the president that they put out in transcript form. And I bookmarked it even though I knew that I would not be able to get behind their paywall to get a transcript of President Trump's interview with the Wall Street Journal is the very clever headline that they've put on this one. But if you're able to dig this one up, dated October 24th, and send the text over, Greg, that would be much appreciated. I think I'd like to take a look at how that one went. Usually the transcripts are pretty revealing and good material for realizing just how dopey the president sometimes sounds. All right. Where to start? Let me also note that I said yesterday that the Columbia Journalism Review was adding to the pile of critics of Bloomberg's reporting on the China hack story. And in addition to Matt Rigdon's sharing on this issue, I have, in not particularly shareable form, from Scott Anderson, who sent it and who included it in our roundup post of the happenings on the show, the recap of the show that we put up each day. He included a link to it, and maybe we'll do it again and call it out this time, because it's interesting and it's perhaps worth your time to listen to. It's not readily shareable because it's another podcast, and I can't just play their podcast in the middle of this podcast. That would be a violation of all the things that get violated when you do those things. You can list them for yourselves. Also, of course, it's weird and it's long because it's a podcast, but it was a very interesting one, and I took the time to listen to it yesterday. Podcast called Let's Know Things, which is a great name for a podcast and a great idea, really. If I could leave you with knowledge after one of these podcasts, I would do it. And he takes a very, like I said, it's a very long look at, one, the original story and the allegations of hardware hacking, 2, the pushback, but then 3, if I interpreted it right, if I read it or heard it the way I think it was meant to be heard, it sounded like the podcaster in this case was sort of agreeing that while it was entirely possible that the story had not been, we didn't get the story entirely right, there really is, I think, good reason to believe that the parties involved are perhaps being overly defensive about this thing, and they have good reason to be overly defensive. It will cost them billions if this story turns out to be true. So an interesting twist on the twist, I thought. Maybe you'll think so too. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Oh, okay, I got to catch up on some conversation going on the side here. Let's see. We have, Michael Musson musing that perhaps Saudi Arabia was just tired of Turkey dribbling out the information and just came clean to end that. That's a possibility, to sort of regain control over the narrative, except the narrative is we committed premeditated murder. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess at some point you got to evaluate. Look, this is truly not working, and we're really just going to have to change. It is a narrative change, that's true. And I suppose if you're a royal household and you're responsible for the execution of justice and what gets called justice in your country, I suppose it's a relatively safe play. And I don't know how else to I wouldn't know how to handle that situation, that's for sure. All right, let's see. So that's a real possibility here. Maureen has this to add here. Let's see. Maureen, and by the way, if you want to follow along, it's just Maureen, but with 2 at the end. Maureen 2. This is the second Maureen. There was an original Maureen. She grabbed the name up first, but Maureen followed her really quickly with a 2. What are we talking about? The MBTI, the Myers-Briggs test. So another follow-up on that. We love to parse the Myers-Briggs test on the show. We've spent a lot of time on it. N people are outnumbered by S almost 2-1. That is interesting. Of course, this is all in the context of our having read plenty about how the whole thing is garbage anyway, but I think it's interesting anyhow. N people outnumbered by S almost 2-1. That's interesting. The other biggie is J for judgment and P for perception. J does list decisiveness, and P likes options or better. Way more comfortable with ambiguity. SJ for reporters mimics their performance by needing definitive info. Also probably mimics their legal department as well. Interesting. What else? Greg sends this one on here. Mueller's investigation. Do you remember Robert Mueller? He's investigating the president and the election of 2016. Where is this from? Shannon Pettypiece. Who is Shannon Pettypiece? I don't know. Let's see. White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. Already under the gun on today's show and yesterday's Bloomberg News. Shannon Pettypiece says Mueller's investigators have reviewed messages to members of the Trump team in which Stone and Jerome Corsi, yes, I did see his name pop up in the news this morning, seem to take credit for the release of Democratic email. So that's new on the Mueller front. And I don't know whether that's a new revelation for us or not. Maureen had one more comment, by the way, about Myers-Briggs. P and J are about 50-50. That's peanut butter and jelly, as I understand it. And 50-50 is a great ratio for peanut butter and jelly, in my view. But in fact, they're talking about what is P? Perception and judgment, right? P and J are 50-50, not like S and N, which was 2-1 S. Think married couple trying to put together a complicated flat pack from IKEA. All right. SJ follows instructions faithfully. NP wings it and a few parts left over. That is interesting. You know what, though? I would consider myself probably a little more N than S, but when it comes to IKEA, I'm strictly S. And I say, and I don't know what it is about that, but I say, the most, I intuit that the best way to get this thing together is to follow their damn directions. It's just, I have no evidence that that's the case because that hardly ever works. But what else are you going to do? I don't like winging it with IKEA stuff because it's a wreck to begin with. Anyway, there you have it. So we're caught up on our commentary, which is an important part of the show. We've done the Saudi Arabia story. We've mentioned the hardware hacking. Yes. So again, yes, it was the Let's Know Things podcast hosted by Colin Wright, who has a very deep, resonant radio voice and sounds like the sort of person that would have a very a very successful podcast. And apparently he tours the country because he writes books and give talks all over the place. So something. You got to trust that guy. It was a very interesting look at it. And I forget how long the podcast runs, but it wasn't 2 hours, I can tell you that. And there was a very, very interesting first half of the show about something completely different, although I thought he was going to tie them together at some point. I found ties between the story of the Coventry Blitz from World War II, the Coventry Blitz conspiracy, and then the Supermicro story after that. And I was actually like, oh, I see what you're getting at. But I don't think he ever stated it outright, but I'm sure it was, I assume he paired the two because it made sense to him. Or I'm just one of those loons that ties everything together, as frequently happens on our show. You know that has happened a number of times. Okay, let's see. Other stories. There are a lot, and I keep making mental notes about which ones we want to do next, and I never follow through on it. So let me jump back into Pocket and see what we've got here. All right, let's see. We'll do this one. Grabbed this tweet from Citizens for Ethics crew in Washington. What was the R for? I can't remember now what they used to. Why is it not in their name? Anyway, they have this tweet, and it is linked to a Forbes article, the title of which is What You Don't Know About Trump: The Huge Holes in Disclosure Rules and How They Could Be Fixed. I always love articles that start off with the assumption that I don't know anything about what's going on. But the Forbes headline probably wouldn't have grabbed me, but for the crew, what is it? Citizens for Responsibility. I think that was it, right? Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Their tweet, I guess, gets at the nugget they find most interesting in the story. And so after that, I am now intrigued. Jared Kushner, it says, took an official meeting with the CEO of Citigroup last year a month before his family's Kushner companies got a $325 million mortgage from Citi for a Brooklyn office complex. Kushner didn't disclose any of it because he's a hidden genius, you see. Another one of these genius stories. And like the 400th quote-unquote mistake on his financial disclosure forms. The larger story from Forbes, reported by Chase Peterson Whithorn, or did you say Whithorn or Withhorn? What do you think? Reported thus on a glitzy New York City block. We're going to find out about which office, I guess, this is. Or didn't they say it was, Crew said it was a Brooklyn office complex. So that's not going to be this building. But let's see what we don't know about Trump. On a glitzy New York City block nestled between Radio City Music Hall and CBS's world headquarters sits 1290 Avenue of the Americas. It's a typical Manhattan skyscraper, home to investment firms, law practices, and an insurance company, except it's partly owned by the President of the United States and partly financed by the government of China. That's not a problem, right? China, much in the news. At a time when Trump is waging a trade war with Beijing, such an arrangement could create ethical concerns. And, they didn't know this, but at a time when the president is reported as being too stupid or stubborn or both to abide by security regulations, and is conversing with his friends at will on unsecured cell phones, to which reportedly Chinese and Russian spies are listening with no barriers then between them and what is charitably referred to in those stories as the president's thinking. But that they did not have any idea at the time that was coming out. Otherwise, they could have added that, the fact that he co-owns a building with the government of China, basically, could be troubling for a number of reasons, not the least of which is they seem to be spying on him and getting away with it because he just blabs on every front. So, at a time when Trump is waging a trade war with Beijing, such an arrangement could create ethical concerns, and yet the federal filing meant to reveal the president's potential conflicts of interest, his 92-page annual financial disclosure report, makes no mention of the building's $950 million mortgage or the fact that Trump's 30% stake in the property puts him on the hook for 30% of that partly Chinese-financed debt. Nor does it mention Trump's 30% share of the $564 million mortgage on a San Francisco tower that he similarly co-owns, or his half of a mortgage taken out against the Las Vegas hotel he owns with billionaire Republican donor Phil Ruffin. It's all perfectly legal, so don't look at this. Federal ethics laws require public servants to list everything from credit card balances to boat loans, but not, strangely enough, the debt held by their businesses, even if their lender is a foreign power. Whoops, I think they forgot about that when they were writing those rules. Lending by foreign powers. In fact, a close reading of the rules shows a long list of financial arrangements and entanglements that can be kept secret. Government officials can partner with foreign investors, take in money from government officials, and apparently stash money in their family members' names, all without ever having to tell the public. No wonder they're not voting on his emoluments. That might not seem like a big deal at first blush. Well, it does. You're wrong. But taken to their logical extreme, and you really don't have to, the laws could permit large-scale conflicts of interest to go undetected. One purely hypothetical but legally possible scenario, Vladimir Putin himself could give a $1 billion business loan to Donald Trump, and as long as he gives it to Trump Organization LLC, or Trump Payroll Corporation, or one of the president's 493 other companies, Trump himself wouldn't have to disclose it to anyone. Great idea. Sounds outlandish, of course, until you consider the headlines that Trump administration officials have already made. Jared Kushner took an official meeting with the CEO of Citigroup last year. You heard this. This is how we started with Crew's tweet. Took a meeting with Citigroup last year, a month before they gave him a $325 million mortgage. Citi says the loan wasn't discussed in the meeting, of course. Kushner didn't disclose any of it, so it wasn't publicly known until the New York Times uncovered the meeting and another that he took with a private equity billionaire whose firm also loaned Kushner money shortly thereafter. What a weird coincidence it is. And as Forbes has reported, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross spent much of his first year in office helping negotiate U.S.-China trade deals while he was a partner in a shipping company that is partly owned by the Chinese government. And probably Mitch McConnell's wife as well. But hey, maybe that's a different one. It's a scenario that the Office of Government Ethics never prepared for. They never thought anybody would do something like this and isn't empowered to handle because the people who wrote the laws governing the Office of Government Ethics didn't think it would ever happen either. It was beyond the pale and unimaginable. The way the agency was created by Congress kind of assumes that the president and his people will be the ones standing on the shining pillar as an example to the whole rest of the government, says Marilyn Glynn, who served as the OGE's acting director under George W. Bush. It seems as if everything's turned around right now and OGE doesn't have the power to make the changes that might be needed. The agency, which wouldn't comment for the story, lacks the authority to investigate ethics violations, issue subpoenas, question witnesses, demand documents, or punish people who violate the rules. What a stupid office that is. It's the Office of Government Ethics. Can you enforce ethics? Nope. Can you investigate? No. Can you ask questions? No. What do? I don't know. Why don't you find out? Because I'm not allowed to ask questions. That sounds like a no-show job to me, but okay. The director can ask federal agencies to investigate their own employees and can alert the Department of Justice to potential criminal violations, but that's about it. Plus, lying on the forms is a crime only if the mistakes can be proven to be intentional. I forgot 400 times is a legitimate excuse, apparently. For a year now, Forbes has tracked Ross forgetting to disclose assets and falsely claiming to have gotten rid of holdings that he had promised to divest, all of which he simply brushed aside as errors. Because why not? What they're telling you here in this article is if you lie and get caught, you can just say it was an error and that's all that ever happens. Oh, well, we think, the rest of the world's like, that's obviously not an error. You're lying. Well, the agencies empowered with the job of saying whether we were lying or not aren't really allowed to do anything, and I know that. Just say it's a mistake. Just say there was a fist fight. Whatever. I got in a fist fight with my form. One thing led to another. I can't tell you what happened. No one really knows. The financial disclosure rules are the result of compromises and are antiquated, says Norm Eisen, a former Obama ethics czar and U.S. ambassador. They were built for another day and time, not for the complicated financial entanglements of the Trump administration and the lying, one might add. America has a long history of mixing business with politics. Indeed, the business of America is business. It was once said by a Republican president. America has a long history of mixing the two, of course. Members of Ulysses S. Grant's administration lined their pockets with whiskey tax kickbacks and plotted to corner the gold market through insider trading. Benjamin Harrison was given a 23-room summer home by the man he appointed Postmaster General. Harrison allegedly said it would be unethical for him to accept the gift, but his wife, the First Lady, could. Following public outcry, the Harrisons ended up paying for the property. Dang. Warren Harding's Secretary of the Interior secretly leased federal oil reserves in exchange for cash. Teapot Dome. Right? 19th century reforms helped crack down on the patronage system that let parties fill government offices with political supporters and even got one president, James Garfield, assassinated by a spurned job seeker. True. But it wasn't, well, we think so. Unless there was, there's really a cover-up about it. But okay. It wasn't until after the Watergate scandal that the government got serious about inspecting public officials' personal finances. In 1976, post-Watergate, see? Jimmy Carter made reform a top campaign promise and pushed a new bill through Congress that created the modern executive branch ethics system with mandatory financial disclosures for public employees, restrictions on conflicts of interest, and a new agency to oversee it all, the Office of Government Ethics. Carter hailed it as a milestone in the history of safeguards against abuse of the public trust. Now remember, that's the guy who, as we were reminded at the beginning of the Trump administration, that had sold off his peanut farm so as to avoid even the appearance of a possibility of an impropriety there, as if the big peanut was going to come sweeping into office and control our foreign policy from a peanut-oriented perspective. But that's what he had to do, being the first president post-Watergate, right? So there you go. And no wonder then that he designed a system, or at least had a hand in designing a system that was based on an entirely now antiquated assumption about what politicians would and wouldn't be willing to do to hold on to their money and influence once elected. I mean, I don't think Jimmy Carter ever contemplated a presidency quite as blatantly greedy and as interested in lying as the Trump administration. From the beginning, the system has been incomplete. The financial disclosure program, the government's primary tool for identifying and preventing conflicts of interest, requires officials to file annual forms that lay out their assets, income, debt, and gifts. But there are dozens of workarounds, gray areas, and outright omissions in the law that officials can exploit to hide holdings, conceal debt, and shield conflicts from the public's view. Besides not having to report any debt held by their businesses, Donald Trump and the members of his administration don't have to say who any of their business partners are. That goes for Wilbur Ross's investment in the shipping company alongside the Chinese, the two most valuable holdings in Trump's entire portfolio, skyscrapers in New York and San Francisco that the president doesn't have to say he owns with billionaire Stephen Roth. Even though Roth is a donor whom Trump reportedly tapped for a spot on his now dissolved Infrastructure Council. Public officials who own businesses while in office don't have to disclose who their customers are. Trump collects an estimated $175 million a year in rent from more than 150 tenants who lease commercial space in his buildings, some of whom have business before the federal government. He doesn't have to tell the public who any of these tenants are. Jared Kushner's real estate business is similarly murky. What's more, officials can hide their ties to troublesome assets by anonymously transferring them to family and friends. Anonymously transferring them? I don't know if that's the word you want to use there, but okay. They don't have to disclose the buyer of anything they sell, I see, whether it's a stock, a luxury condo, or an entire business. And if they give an asset to someone rather than sell it, they don't even have to disclose that a transaction occurred at all. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue transferred control of investments worth at least $8 million, including a stake in a multi-million-dollar grain merchandising business, to his adult children shortly after taking office. Sounds familiar? The assets no longer have to appear on his disclosure form as if he never owned them at all, even though his actions leading the USDA could have benefited his family by boosting the value of the grain company, which the Perdues have since decided to sell. And they probably, market theory tells you why do they decide to sell? Because it's worth more now. Why is it worth more now? Well, Dad's the, Secretary of Agriculture. Draw your own conclusions. And there appears to be enough slack in the law to benefit public officials down the road, too. In some cases, those officials could get their divested investments right back once he or she leaves office if they're placed into certain trusts with wink-wink agreements about who really owns them. Even the laws surrounding what does need to be disclosed are imprecise enough to conceal the true size of a conflict of interest and mask suspicious fluctuations over time. Filers must list assets and liabilities, but only in broad ranges, topping out at a greater than $50 million, even for a $400 million skyscraper or a $2 billion loan. When it comes to the income these holdings produce, The high end of the range is even less helpful. Greater than $5 million. That's it. That's how high it goes. Spouses face less scrutiny. The range for their investments tops out at just greater than $1 million. The 15 members of Trump's cabinet and their spouses own a collective 26 investments that produced more than $1 million of income in 2017, but there's no way to know how much more. Lax rules have been around since Carter was president, but for decades, buttoned-up politicians, fearful of being perceived as corrupt, have largely sidestepped them by opting to put their assets in blind trusts or bland mutual funds and government bonds. Then Donald Trump won the White House and brought his rich friends along with him. Rex Tillerson divested his stake in Exxon. Then the other incoming cabinet members agreed to sell some of their most troublesome assets. But the new administration brought substantial portfolios with them to the government. Stephen Mnuchin kept a number of opaque private holdings, as did DeVos and Ross. Kushner kept much of his real estate empire. Instead, the officials have promised to recuse themselves from matters that benefit their business interests, a plan that works only when those business interests are fully known. Most people in the past were willing to divest, says Virginia Cantor, an ethics lawyer in the Clinton and Obama White Houses. This administration has taken a very high-risk approach. They've said, we'll recuse, but they haven't been very transparent in how they identify potential conflicts of interest. The president, who's bound by the same disclosure rules as everyone else, but is exempt from being prosecuted for criminal violations of conflict of interest laws, went even a step further, declaring that since he can't be punished if he were to exploit his public office for personal gain, he, quote, can't have a conflict of interest at all, which is, of course, a huge misunderstanding of the way everything was supposed to work and the way the people who wrote the law intended for it to work. If you can't punish me, then I must not have done something wrong. No, it's just that I claim an anonymous immunity from punishment. Now, the article continues here. It's not that there isn't a better way. Many of the omissions in financial disclosure laws could be solved with the stroke of a pen or a slight adjustment to the law, including simple reforms like requiring the disclosures of business partners and lenders. But as you know, a stroke of a pen, not always an easy thing to do. By the way, reported yesterday, Donald Trump, I thought for more, but apparently people thought this was the third time that he had been brought to, shuffled off to a bill signing ceremony and attempted to leave before signing the bill. He gave his speech, figured he was done, started walking out. Melania grabs him and turns him around and says, you were supposed to come and sign this bill. Opioid bill this time. Had a whole room full of people waiting for him to, witness him signing the thing. And off he goes, tottering off. I'm going to watch telly, leave me alone. No, you got to come and sign the bill. But of course, it's genius that he did that. Don't get me wrong. It's genius. He's a constitutional genius. He knows that if he doesn't sign the bill, it becomes law anyway, unless he's trying to claim it's a pocket veto because Congress isn't in session. But Congress is in session because they're taking testimony from judicial nominees and, of course, working very hard on changing the Wikipedia of life such that it looks like there's actually a tax cut in the works. Remember that. Anyway, so with the stroke of a pen, this whole thing could be changed, of course, but no one is willing to write those things down and give the pen to a president to do it. And this guy might forget anyhow. Customers who account for more than a certain percentage of the revenues of a public official's company could be added to the disclosure forms easily as well. And more scrutiny of immediate family members, such as additional monitoring of family trusts before and after officials' time in office, could stamp out suspicious transfers of worrisome assets, but only if the OGE is given greater authority. Congress should be clamping down, says Richard Painter, who served as the chief ethics lawyer in George W. Bush's White House. Watchdog groups have put forth a number of proposals to reform the agency, including granting it investigatory powers to actually look into ethics violations itself and punish officials for breaking the rules. Many have also suggested making the OGE's director fireable only for cause and ending the president's exemption from criminal conflict of interest laws. Last year, Walter Schaub, who famously clashed with Trump as head of the OGE until early 2017, sent Congress 13 detailed recommendations, which include granting the agency greater independence and patching up some of the loopholes surrounding trusts. Sounds like a pretty good idea, and of course, probably nothing at all came of it. In May, 2 Democratic lawmakers introduced bills that would adopt some of these proposals. They were quickly joined by 32 co-sponsors, all Democrats, of course, but have otherwise gone nowhere. The legislature, which has granted the OGE a measly $16 million budget, has yet to show serious interest in revamping the ethics system. There's a little bit more. We'll wind this up after the break and move on to other issues looming in the background tied to this and some independent of it. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let us wrap up with the Forbes article on the woefully underfunded and underpowered Office of Government Ethics. It just concludes this way. In the meantime, it's hard to imagine the president agreeing to do anything to restrict his family's businesses or rein in his administration. But all that could change if the House and Senate, yes, flip in November, or if ethics scandals continue to plague the government. That's not true. If ethics scandals continue to plague the government and we don't see Democrats leading both houses of Congress, it simply won't happen. So let's not be, fooled by that suddenly ethics scandals plaguing the government is going to change Republican minds about what they need to do in Congress, although I guess anything is possible. And certainly it's worth pointing out that those people could then face electoral punishment in future elections, 2020, 24, depending on when those senators are up. But gosh, that doesn't work all that well usually. Recalling the days of Watergate and the laws, antiquated as they are, that resulted, Eisen, the former Obama ethics lawyer, notes, every time we have a flourishing of corruption like this, it's followed by a burst of reform. Right, a burst of reform aimed at preventing the next bunch of people from getting away with what these guys just did, but grandfathering, essentially, what these guys are guilty of. That's the way the cycle works. Republicans come in, massive corruption. Democrats come in, clean it up. Next bunch of Republicans come in, undo everything, and then claim immunity from prosecution. Democrats come in and say, that's terrible, you really should be subject to it. Republicans say, we really shouldn't. That's basically it there. That's how the cycle moves. Okay, so let's see. Other connected stories, of course, include, where is all this stuff? How come I feel like I don't have these things saved in Pocket? Well, I know we were tweeting about them yesterday, so we'll have to go back and pick them up this way. The big story of last night and this morning is was it the New York Times? Yes, the New York Times, which is failing, as you know, and Donald Trump is already contradicting things and saying, no, this is not happening. It's so wrong what the New York Times is reporting. The big story is Donald Trump is a huge genius, once again, because he's because he's an idiot. I mean, here's where we now stand. I guess I first became aware of this New York Times story through Andrew Kaczynski tweeting about it. Basically, his grab from the piece, which is, well, I'll just open it up here. The New York Times piece, when Trump phones friends, the Chinese and Russians listen and learn. And Kaczynski tweeting about it. White House officials, a grab quote from this. White House officials say they can only hope he refrains from discussing classified information when he is on them. That is, the unsecure personal cell phones that he runs around gabbing with friends on. And, unfortunately, the truth is that no, he's not going to live up to that hope. It's a lost cause, and you might as well accept it, because if he's disclosing classified information to the Chinese and the Russians, it is, after all, genius. It's being done from a genius perspective. We know this is the case because the article, When Trump Phones Friends, the Chinese and Russians Listen and Learn, is written by Matthew Rosenberg and Maggie Haberman. So there you have it. It's genius. Let me just say at the outset, before diving into the article, because we might not be able to finish the article, but I will, and of course you've probably read it already, but let me just jump to the part where, there was lots of great reaction to it, which was really amazing, I thought, including people picking out great excerpts from the article, like Clara Jeffrey, taking a look at this piece that says, administration officials said Mr. Trump's longtime paranoia about surveillance. Well before coming to the White House, he believed his phone conversations were often being recorded. Gave them some comfort that he was not disclosing classified information on the calls. That is to say, he was always complaining about his phones being tapped because he's a paranoid idiot. And really, basically, the most basic function of paranoid idiots, as far as I can tell, is to go around claiming that they're being surveilled. So they thought, oh, well, he'll be careful about what he says on the phone. And then they realized, no, he's a moron. The very next sentence says, they said they had further confidence, though. Don't worry about it. It's true that he's too stupid to avoid revealing what he knows to his friends because he's a blabbermouth and an idiot and doesn't really understand the import of giving away that information. Mostly because he says, if I know it and I'm a moron, what harm could come of it? And don't forget that was probably the case for the first 70 years of your life. But now, because you wear this suit and move into this house and claim to be president, our Constitution forces us to tell you stuff that it would actually be dangerous for you to know. That's never been the case before. You've never known anything at all of any kind, much less dangerous stuff that would be dangerous to share. But now we all pretend you're president and we tell you these things. And, as a blabbermouth moron, you might tell the wrong person or tell somebody when someone else is listening. But don't worry. He's very paranoid and worried about surveillance. Oh, that was all an act. Now we do have to worry. Well, don't worry. Another genius move. Don't worry. The true genius of Donald Trump is he's too stupid to know anything, even when we give him the information. You see. Administration officials said Mr. Trump's longtime paranoia, initially gave them some hope that he wouldn't blab. But don't worry, they said they have further confidence that he was not spilling secrets because he rarely digs into the details of the intelligence he is shown and is not well versed in the operational specifics of the military or covert activities. And Clara Jeffrey noting basically the White House here is telling us don't worry about Trump's hacked cell phones because he's a dumbass who doesn't know anything. Although she uses the word differently. Dumb S word. I like that combination, dumbass, but I'll say dumbass instead. Yeah, that's basically it. And I think everybody else picked up on the same hint. Michael Cohen, not his former lawyer, but former speechwriter, SpeechBoy71 on Twitter, says, just so we're clear, the president continues to use an unsecured phone that is being eavesdropped on by the Chinese government. And why is that? Because he doesn't want to re-upload his contacts. That's another of the issues raised here. Officials said the president has 2 official iPhones that have been altered by the National Security Agency to limit their capabilities and vulnerabilities, and a third personal phone that is no different from hundreds of millions of iPhones in use around the world. Mr. Trump keeps the personal phone, White House officials said, because unlike his other two phones, which are actually secure, he can store his contacts in it. So I don't want to put my contacts back into the other phone. Leave me alone. And, and then, of course, Michael Cohen, this is the quote I really meant to grab, was him saying, hey, this is great. Intelligence officials aren't too worried about Trump spilling classified secrets because he's incurious and dim, was another way of saying things besides the way Clara Jeffrey put it. And, that's actually quite troubling in all of this. But Matt Iglesias also making the comment in his own way. Something I've begun to wonder about over the past year or so is whether some of the conservative movement's previously expressed belief in the transcendent importance of government information security protocols was in part mere opportunism. One wonders about this. There's probably very little to be gained besides outraging ourselves by actually reading the full story as reported by the New York Times. You've likely gotten the gist of it, if not every single detail. And I'll review it off the air and see whether there's anything else that needs to be retrieved from it. But once again, yes, but her emails, et cetera, et cetera. And I should also point out, I mentioned that Trump woke up this morning to tweet out his vigorous denial that this stuff was happening. He tweeted out, the so-called experts on Trump over at the New York Times wrote a long and boring article on my cell phone usage that is so incorrect, I do not have time here to correct it. I only use government phones, which he capitalizes, which is weird. You know how he is with capitalization. I only use government phones, and I have only one seldom used government cell phone. Story is so wrong. And, well, that's in itself, of course, a hint that, the story is actually right. That's how you're supposed to read that comment. It's now a confirmation that the story is correct. But another angle on this, Twister Cat sends us this one. I didn't notice this because in the format in which I was reading it doesn't display, all of this information. But, a lot of Twitter readers do display where the tweets are coming from or what format, what Twitter platform or what client, I guess is the correct answer, you're using to do your tweeting, and sent me the screen grab of what showed up for Twister Cat here. And then added one of those neat little red circles that you draw around the important text to highlight it. Donald Trump's tweet, the so-called experts, right? You remember the whole thing. But we might as well remind you of what it says exactly. The so-called experts on Trump over at the New York Times wrote a long and boring article on my cell phone usage. It's so incorrect, yada, yada, yada. I only use government phones and have only one seldom used government cell phone. Story is so wrong. He tweets from his Twitter for iPhone client. Seldom use. I only use government phones. I never use the cell phones anymore, he says from his stupid cell phone. Pretty much as expected. I don't think anybody was terribly shocked by that, but there you have it. It's worth knowing. That's about it. Anyway, it's been amazing. Between that and I mentioned to you Daniel Dale's, right at the top of the show, documentation of his latest lies from his rally, and there are some real whoppers there. But there was at least one new one. If I can scroll down a little bit and see if I can find it. Oh, yes, this was the one. This Josh Dawsey actually documented this one from his rally last night. This is the most unbelievable one yet, I think. These towns are being liberated. You heard about this one? Trump says of ICE and MS-13, it's like watching World War II movies. Trump says. It's his claim is that he's seeing constantly, I guess, news footage, unbiased, real reporting from news outlets showing the liberation of whole towns from the dominance of MS-13 paramilitary forces, I guess. That there are towns in America, he's sure. Of course, the question will be asked, what towns are being liberated? And don't be a baby will be the answer. Come on, send your cameras to those towns. Which towns? Those towns. And see for yourself what's happening. And he really thinks that there's like actual World War II style liberations going on where people have been living, cowering in their homes and in their basements in fear for years on end under the occupation of MS-13. Only now emerging, blinking, emerging into the sunlight. I haven't been out of doors in several years. Thank you to the American paratroops who finally invaded in D-Day and got rid of our MS-13 oppressors. People are eating it up, and people believe that there's riots in California over sanctuary cities, and unnamed cities in America have been occupied and run by MS-13 for years. It's just like watching World War II movies. And Hunter was pointing out this morning, just another one of these signs of dementia. He could quite well be dreaming or imagining this stuff and then just repeats it as though it was real and thinks it is. And I think eventually fools himself into believing it as well. I think it might, I don't know whether it's dementia or it could be dementia driven, I guess, but I think he actually is watching or at least recalling World War II movies, and then in the heat of the moment, giving his stupid rally speeches, he thinks he really has seen it. It starts off as hyperbole, and then I think he comes to believe it, that there are really towns that have been living under the dominance of MS-13, entire towns. The populace living underground, hoping against hope that American forces would arrive to liberate them, and he really believes that that's actually happening. Nuclear launch codes in his hands, once again, watching the telly and mistaking what he sees there for reality, or embellishing at least his own reality by grafting stories that he sees on television into real life and then just concluding that that actually happened. It's pretty amazing, to say the very least. All right, let's see. Other things that we should be sharing. Do we save this one for Friday or not? I don't know. Let's see. We mentioned yesterday the story of, how did the Washington Post put it? In service of whim, the concept of now going back and retroactively changing the Wikipedia of life, such that the supposed documentation declares a history more in keeping with the way Trump describes reality, so that they don't have to admit that he's wrong, although frequently people do admit that he's wrong anyway. Like I did see Orrin Hatch was cited via Twitter somewhere along the line today as saying that the tax cut that Trump is touting is very unlikely to happen. It's certainly not real in any true sense right now. Kevin Drum, though, was on the case with this one too. We should add him to the background of coverage of this changing Wikipedia idea. I think that's my own invention so far. Nobody else adopting that one. Fake tax cut now embellished with fake details, Kevin reported on Tuesday, and we didn't happen to get to that one yesterday. Well, we've now sailed far beyond the Isle of Lies and straight into the maelstrom of making, we'll say, crap up. Embedded here is Richard Rubin's tweet that says, Trump tells my Wall Street Journal colleagues that the 10% tax cut will be revenue neutral, quote, based on certain things. He won't say what those certain things are. And again, just, it gives me a headache, literally, to think of how stupid he is. And like, I mean, I don't know what else you would say if you're caught up in that lie. But I mean, like, Essentially, they're asking him, so this tax cut, like, I guess they probably thought it would be funny to start to treat it like it was real and ask questions about it as if it was real, just to see what sort of nonsense filler Trump would come up with. That's the most charitable interpretation of it. I'm sure Armando is now screaming if he's even listening to the show. No, it wasn't. They didn't think it was funny. They wanted to bolster the case for the tax cuts. They wanted to help Trump prove it was real. And that's another interpretation of things. And maybe it's even more realistic than thinking it was. Although Richard Rubin here seems to be laughing at, not along with, Trump here and saying, oh, a tax cut, eh? Well, will it be revenue neutral? Yes, it will. Oh, really? You say that's a very interesting claim. Based on what? Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Smarty Pants, Richard Rubin from the Wall Street Journal. You want a story? I'll give you a story. It is going to be revenue neutral because it's called leadership, all right? And I know business. I'm going to make a great deal for the American people. Not even for me. It's not even going to help me a bit. It's going to be for the middle class. All right. Based on what? Based on things, certain things. What things? Certain things. That's it. Now, everybody else in the world laughs in his face and says, what a moron. He doesn't know. He's making it up. What things? Certain things. Really? That's it? But there you go. But that's going to get reported and people are going to say it's in the Wall Street Journal. The president says it's based on certain things. Some people will take that seriously and say he doesn't want to tip his hand. He's a genius. Others will say he's just lying to get through the day. And that in itself is genius. Other reporters will actually say that. Others will say he doesn't know what he's talking about. And so what? One more, he doesn't know what he's talking about on the already heaping helping of he doesn't know what he's talking about. Kevin Drum knows, and he goes on to say there is no tax cut planned. There's never been a tax cut planned. Trump just tossed this out while he was in a lather about something else and noticed that it got a good reception. So he repeated it. And why not? Republicans love tax cuts. Now everyone is starting to get aboard, and we're even getting some fake details about this fake plan. It's going to be revenue neutral. It'll be for the middle class, honest. It'll be paid for by Mexico. Why not? They'll throw that one in there too, right? I don't know. Once again, the campaign press is in its usual bind. I'm sure every campaign reporter out there knows this is just another one of Trump's fantasies spun out solely to get attention from campaign reporters. And yet he is the president of the United States. What's he going to do? Right? And I mean, that's their constant conundrum. He is. He isn't, but he is. He says he is. He looks like he is. He's wearing a suit. He's got the plane. You know, he is. So you got to report it because the president of the United States says it, and that's a true thing. It's not. It's just used to be the case. Now it isn't. What are you going to do? I don't know. You're going to say he's lying and all the rules don't apply anymore. I guess that's the only thing you can do. And I guess it's left up to us to do those things. All right. Very weird. Very interesting. Let's see. Other things that we might want to toss into the mix. I see, I don't know whether Armando is free tomorrow, but I see a courts and judicial system theme setting itself up here. If I can just line up all of these pocket stories and talk about them one after the other. I think we could weave together that theme, and so I'll put you on warning. Now, I can handle the thing, at least for the outset tomorrow, even without, if you happen to be busy. But I'll just put you on notice, and we'll think about that for tomorrow. In the meantime, let's wrap things up with this piece that I put aside from Ezra Klein at Vox. Those of you who don't know what an Ezra Klein is or what Vox is, we'll have explainers for you. That's what we always say about Vox every time. I picked up this one. I thought this was interesting. Worth a listen or read, depending on how you want to handle it. Is the media making American politics worse? It is. Does it bother you that Donald Trump says that it's also true that the media is making American politics worse? It should, but in a different way. This is a sort of transcripted version of A Difficult Conversation, Ezra says, about the state of political journalism. It's from Monday. And I thought it was a relatively interesting thing. And we hear from both of the participants in this conversation fairly often on this show. He begins this way. I'm a political journalist. I've been a political journalist for 15 years. I believe in my profession, but right now I'm worried we're failing. You are. I'm worried we're making American politics worse, not better. That's not because journalists aren't doing remarkable, courageous, heroic work. There are some, yes, right here. Look at the Me Too movement. The investigations of Donald Trump's finances, the remarkable reporting that journalists do every day in the midst of war zones and Ebola outbreaks and authoritarian regimes. It's because everything around us has changed. And this is true and worth considering, right? Our business models, the way people read us, the way we compete with each other, the way we're manipulated, and we're not keeping up. Instead, we're getting played by the outrage merchants and con artists and trolls and polarizers who understand this new world better. President Trump is the most successful media hacker out there, but he's not the only one. And again, that's not to say that it is a conscious plan for him. It is simply no more conscious than simply saying, lying always works for me. I should continue to do it. And don't even worry about prepping the lies beforehand. Just say what you want to say. Now that you're president, you actually have an army of people that you can put to work behind the scenes to make your lies true after the fact. So he just continues to do it. We're being used, he says, to fracture American democracy, and I don't think we know how to stop it. It's hard to understand a machine when you're inside of it, as I am. You need people on the outside who can see the system more clearly, so I asked Jay Rosen to join me on my podcast, which we can't play here, but we can read some of the transcript. Rosen is a professor of journalism at the New York University and founder of Press Think. He's one of our sharpest critics and interpreters. I wanted him to help me think through what's wrong in the press and what I'm doing wrong in my own work. Sounds like a good premise. You can listen to the whole conversation, of course, in a link herein. Parts of the discussion, edited for length and clarity, follow, and we'll try and get some of those in. There was this article, Ezra begins, going around about whether journalists pay too much attention to Twitter. And I think we clearly do. Twitter shows us what all your competitors are doing all the time. And it's coming at this moment when the business models are under stress, and so the consequences of taking a different approach feels more dangerous. I think this is actually a good observation. Donald Trump knows exactly how to leverage that. That I'm not so sure about. When he gives us some nuts rally where he says a bunch of stuff that's really off the wall, we're all on it. We're all tweeting about it. We all feel we're missing the story if we ignore it. He crowds out all these other stories, and he's showing how to hack our coverage, and now others are learning how to do it too. Jay responds, that's an important point. The culture of the political press orients individual practitioners toward their professional peers rather than toward the users or even towards the news. It's hard to know if you're doing well in journalism. How do you know that you're doing the right thing? Ways that we could measure that, like audience response, are actually discredited by most journalists. Those are considered to be pandering. So professional journalists are really oriented toward each other. There's always a risk that if you follow the story of the day, you're missing what's actually happening. And you can look at this pack journalism phenomenon as a way of spreading that risk. This, I think, is also a great observation. If everyone is wrong, then no one is wrong. If everyone is following the wrong pattern, it's not a problem for any individual professional because everyone missed the same story. That's one of the reasons why, after these major crashes and failures of the press system, like the run-up to the Iraq War, like the failure to alert the nation about the financial crisis, like the debacle of 2016, you don't see the press sort of called into crisis. You don't see the equivalent of a 9/11 commission to examine what went wrong. You don't see collective action within the institution. You just go on to the next story because everybody was wrong, so it's not really a problem. Now, Ezra only agrees with that halfway, he says. I do think there's been a lot of reckoning in the press post-Donald Trump. There's been these peculiar but nevertheless agonizing arguments over whether or not to call things he says that are untrue lies or just misinformation. There's certainly been a move into a more oppositional space, It really surprises me, actually, the degree to which publications frame themselves antagonistically to this president. And why my last alarm didn't go off, I have no idea, but that would have clued me into the fact that we're a lot closer to the end of the show than originally anticipated. But we'll play along with the music here instead, let things run a little bit long. Anyway, you should take a look at the rest of this article, and it is a very interesting setup, the conversation between Ezra and Jay. I like that very first point in particular. I thought that was pretty descriptive of what I view as going on, and a great excuse, if nothing else. Anyway, time for us now to hand the microphones over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And if we start now, it'll be easier to fit in all the stories that you'll hear about when you do tune in to this show immediately following the close of our own. Trump's remarks, first of all, following the mail bombs sent to his liberal critics across the country, continue to normalize violence. What a fantastic response that would be. A GOP Pennsylvania lawmaker wanted to balance the budget with more gambling and booze. That sounds like a great idea. If you wait until after you've finished balancing the budget before you hit the booze, that'd be perfect. The White House is demanding party affiliation for nonpartisan judge jobs at the VA, and only nominees who have voted Republican are getting through. What a surprise. Army officials failed to prove GOP claims that anti-fascist protesters are a national security threat, but they really tried to make it look like they are.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Well, there's more with justice. How about this? GOP mailed incorrect voting info to voters in a key Senate battleground state that could result in spoiled ballots, but swear it was just an accident, just like every other time it's happened year after year after year. And a California-based white nationalist leader and 3 others charged in federal court for conspiracy to incite riots. Stay tuned.